Hello everyone, DeeDee Catron here today for Donna Downey Studio, and I am going to show you an art journal page. It is a few of my favorite techniques, things that I really enjoy doing and I really like how they work together on a page. I'm starting with a piece of watercolor paper and I am covering it in Liquitex gesso to prep for some different things that I want to do on top of it. You can work directly on top of watercolor paper if you'd like, but if you don't prep it, then the watercolor paper is going to suck all the moisture out of any materials that you're using, and they'll dry a lot quicker than you're used to, and they may not move like you're used to, and things like that. But I really enjoy the thickness of watercolor paper, so that's why I start with it, and I just gave it a quick layer of Liquitex gesso, and it's ready and I can continue to work on top of it as I choose. This is a Donna Downey stencil 8x8 and it's super pretty. I love these huge blooms that it has, and actually as I start working on this project I am thinking that I want them on the bottom, but it's really funny. You'll see me turn it around later and turn this into the top. But I'm using some heavy gesso, and you could use Liquitex heavy gesso or any that you have. I am using a Blick version, artist's gesso, because I teach some local art journaling classes and it's fairly decently priced, and I really love the texture that it has. And I am using a spatula and putting that heavy gesso through the stencil. Now here, I left this in because I really loved how this underpaper turned out. So actually in my next project, I'm going to use the underpaper. Um, and here you'll also see there's not necessarily a right side or a wrong side to any stencil, and sometimes just by flipping it over, you can get the same kind of feel because we've got these flower blooms without them being exactly the same all over the page. So there's a fun tip. In And I want to mention real quick while I'm drawing about that underpaper. All I was doing was cleaning off the stencil so that the gesso didn't get stuck inside the openings and then it would break later because some of the areas are a little bit dainty. So I was cleaning it off on that underpaper with a baby wipe, and as I did that, the gesso that was on the stencil got pushed through the opening and created this really great ghost of, excuse me, this really great ghost effect on my underpaper. So I'm going to keep that and use that in my next project. So that's really cool. But I am right now using my heat tool to heat the gesso dry. And one of the things you have to remember, this is definitely one of my favorite techniques here. I should start off by saying that. But one of the things you have to remember when you're heating, especially acrylic based products, is that they will bubble under too much heat. In this case, that's exactly what I wanted. So if you saw the pictures at the beginning of the video, all the texture that I have in the flower blooms, that comes from overheating the gesso and it starts to bubble. And then I just use my hands to press those bubbles back down and it creates that kind of rocky texture. Then I got out some fluid acrylics and I'm using a mixture of Deco Art fluid acrylics and Golden's fluid acrylics. The first two here, this turquoise color and the Payne's gray, they're from Deco Art, but Golden and other brands too have just as great colors. These were just two that caught my eye real quick. I'm using the turquoise to rub against all that great texture that I created with the stencil and the heavy gesso. And the gesso just acts differently than a modeling paste or a gel medium or a similar product, which are all just fine to use as well. They just have slightly different results. Excuse me, a little bit of a sore throat here. I did also take my water brush. I wet the page before I started with the paint. I can't remember if I mentioned that. So my page is already wet, which is letting that fluid acrylic really move around, kind of similar to watercolor, but it will be permanent when it's dry. So that's really great. And I am using a smaller brush to kind of splatter those colors around too. I love a lot of white space, but sometimes too much white space or maybe too stark of white space can kind of create a little bit of an imbalance. So I like to just do a couple little flicks with a paintbrush of the same colors that I'm using, and it really, to me, helps kind of bring the whole thing together. It marries my areas of color with my areas of white space very well. And I'm just heating everything and making sure it's dry because beautifully enough, it will all be permanent. I love fluid acrylics. I do add a tiny bit of water to some wet paint on the side there to kind of create a drip. I think I need to sit down one day and just practice drips. I love the way they look, but it seems like I can never get them right. We're also judgmental of ourselves, right? It's just a drip. Now I've gotten out some golden fluid acrylic and I am using the green gold, and I'll have to double check the yellow color. But the reason I got out a palette instead of using it on my underpaper was because I wanted to mix the two colors and I didn't want the underpaper to suck all the moisture out of them before I got a chance to use them. I'm using my fingers to create some dots on my page, and it's just a really great like pattern, repeatable pattern that is easy to move around on the page and to help create texture and depth and layers. And I really enjoy it, and I really like the way the gold and yellow, or the gold green and the yellow mix together to create this almost kind of hybrid olive lime color. And make sure those are dry. And I've gotten out a Viva Las Vegas stamp, and it's called the Writing Triangles, and there's 3 triangles with writing in them. They're very cool to stamp in the background of some of your projects and to stamp repeatedly to help also bring out some patterns and some textures. The ink pad that I'm using, I actually created this ink pad. It's the new Tim Holtz Archival Black Soot from Ranger Ink. I really love their normal black, but if you saw the CHA release, the Black Soot is really black. It doesn't have that kind of blue tint that the other does. So I just got a blank pad, a DIY distress pad, and a Black Soot re-inker and filled that. I've gone to some titanium white golden fluid acrylic paint, and I am adding dots to those green, gold, yellow circles that I made earlier. And this really helps carry the white space across that color at the top too. And going back to flicking some paint, and I do flick some green gold / yellow around, and I do flick a little bit of white too. Oh, I tried another drip, and I wonder if I don't like that they get crooked. That's kind of funny, right? My dots, my drips never seem to go directly straight down. That's probably why I'm unhappy with them. Now I've got an archival pen out, and I'm just drawing some circles around the circles that have circles in them. Have I mentioned that I really like circles? It's true. Yeah, so I'm just doing a little bit of doodling on the page, and then, oh, and I covered up that drip. I was really unhappy with it. And the great thing about gesso, if you're unhappy with something, you can just cover it up and either try again or move on with something else that you know will make you happy. So this page to me is kind of just some of my favorite techniques that I like to do using gesso and some fluid acrylics and playing with texture and things like that. And of course some background stamping and stenciling and getting my fingers dirty and a little bit of doodling. I love circles and I love bright colors. I don't use them as well as some other people, but I'm certainly practicing at that. I feel like I'm really good with um, one color and then black and white, or maybe even 2 colors in black and white. But practice makes perfect, so that's what we're doing. And then, oh yes, I did mirror the triangles from the right side to the left, but so that it didn't seem so heavily triangular or so symmetrical, I should say, I did stamp those off the page. And then I'm going to take a little bit of the golden fluid paint, and oh, and that one's a Deco Art fluid paint. If I know some people really like to know exactly what we're using, then I kind of colored in the triangles, and then I use a paper towel to pull some of that color out so that it just showed, excuse me, kind of like a little bit of a wash or a tint there. All right. Thanks so much for joining me, and be sure to check out the rest of the Artist Gang videos. There's one every Tuesday, and check out all of Donna's videos, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye. And I did want to say real quick, I almost forgot, I did finish this page off by doing a little bit of stitching over some sari ribbon and some scallops that I cut out of vintage book text.